Iran's version of the art of the deal is a product that UANI has put together, which really showcases the Iranian grand strategy as it relates to negotiations with the West.
While US diplomats may believe each party will approach negotiations in the same manner, ultimately the Islamic Republic's negotiating strategy has been shaped by its Islamist Iranian psyche.
Iran has sought to weaponize the negotiating process. It likes to lure Western counterparts, particularly the United States, into a negotiating process because it feels that the process itself is a shield from pressure.
In order for US policymakers to be able to unpack this strategy, they must become familiar with the nuances of the Iranian Islamist rationale, which is a completely different mindset to that of the West. Showing the green garden. This historic Persian proverb perfectly encapsulates the Islamic Republic's strategy towards US negotiators. In the context of the talks, it means the Iranians will make overly ambitious but vague promises to the West without actually offering anything concrete in order to keep the talks alive and keep the West at the negotiating table. Today, we see this with Abbas Araghchi, the foreign minister and chief nuclear negotiator, promising the US billions of dollars of worth of investment in Iran should the US lift sanctions. Araghchi makes these bold, overly ambitious promises without having any authority to actually implementing them. He is promising a green garden without actually opening the door.
Iranian negotiators have often deployed a good cop, bad cop strategy to manipulate Western negotiators. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei has used this approach to extract maximum concessions from his Western counterparts, and it's deployed through the false dichotomy of viewing Iranian politics through the lens of reformists versus hardliners, even though true power in the Islamic Republic is centralized in the hands of the Supreme Leader. Iranian negotiators deploy this tactic by presenting the idea that concessions made by the other side are necessary to empower so-called reformists or moderates at the expense of hardliners who see confrontation and conflict. We saw this in March when President Masoud Pezeshkian insisted publicly that he's interested in dialogue and said that he told Parliament, I myself believe that it would be better to have dialogue. Then the Supreme Leader said that we will not negotiate with America. After that, I announced that we will not have a dialogue with America.
The Iranians have mastered the art of ambiguity when it comes to negotiations with the West. What this practically means is the Iranian regime will avoid clear-cut commitments, preferring vague language open to interpretation in order for them to cry deniability, but also reap the benefits of any deal. In the context of the nuclear agreement in 2015, the JCPOA, this was an evident strategy the Iranian regime employed. While the text of the agreement vaguely said that the deal should positively contribute to peace and stability in the Middle East, the Iranians claimed that their destabilization of the region, their ballistic missile program, did not violate these terms, as the agreement itself was strictly in relation to the nuclear program.
The Iranian regime during negotiations will also issue hyperbolic threats against the United States and its allies to flame American anti-war public opinion, which it tries to use as a shield against military action targeting its nuclear facilities. Once the Islamic Republic's officials do so, they will depend on sympathizers in the West to amplify their warnings, smearing those who are supporting targeted military action against Iranian military facilities as psychotic, suicidal, warmongers, neocons. In turn, this leads the same Western-based voices to warn of false choices, that it's either this deal or war. But history and a pattern of underwhelming Iranian responses after a decisive application of American military power against the Islamic Republic's interests suggest otherwise. In 1988, during Operation Praying Mantis, when the United States eliminated half of the Islamic Republic's navy, maritime provocations dropped soon after, and it contributed to the end of the Iran-Iraq War.
Stop and abandon ship. I intend to sink you.
I think that the performance of our ships in the Persian Gulf incidents of the last several days prove that if you're ready, you don't need a lot of planning. It's a come-as-you-are situation, and the ships were prepared, and when the whistle blew, they were ready to go.
Israel also struck Iran twice last year. Rather than a large war, the strikes forced the Iranian regime to pressure Hezbollah into a ceasefire with Israel.
Another strategy used by the Islamic Republic is promising lucrative business opportunities for Western negotiators. The claims that Iran is the only untapped market in the world and that lifting sanctions will be good for US business, offering them billions of dollars of opportunities. This is exactly the line Abbas Araghchi, the foreign minister and lead nuclear negotiator, has been pushing in the past few weeks. But this promise of lucrative business opportunity is nothing but false hope and deception, promising the moon but not being able to deliver. We saw this during the JCPOA years. However, when the Obama administration lifted sanctions, instead of welcoming Western business, welcoming US business opportunities, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader who has ultimate authority in the regime, and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, his ideological paramilitary, opted to detain US hostages and use them as bargaining chips against the West.
Iranian negotiators are grandmasters at running out the clock and dragging out negotiating processes with the United States and its allies. This is all an attempt to provide a shield for the regime against pressure. Sanctions pressure and also military pressure. In the current context, the Iranians want to run out the clock on snapback to avoid the mechanism being invoked under UN Security Council Resolution 2231. It's set to expire in October. Additionally, a long negotiating process for the Iranians enables them to try to polarize the U.S. domestic political debate, to try to divide the United States from Israel. And also, they use the negotiating process to bolster their own currency and own stock market. And we're already seeing this in the negotiations during the Trump administration that have started in Oman. So the Iranians like long, protracted processes for this very reason. And we all need to be on guard for these kinds of gimmicks and tactics that the Iranians employ. Some kind of the Iranians also like to offer cosmetic concessions. These include gradually easing the self-imposed Iranian ban on direct talks, pushing back the expiration of the snapback sanctions mechanism, and confidence-building measures which do not fundamentally alter the parameters of Iran's nuclear program. Such positioning can already be seen with Iran's foreign minister granting the United States delegation a direct meeting during the Oman talks, while using the lure of more meaningful direct talks in the future to keep the U.S. in the negotiations process. And Iran will also weaponize the U.S. desire to engage directly by making a mountain out of a molehill of this issue to present it as a major compromise when it decides to engage in direct talks with the United States.
Iranian negotiators will almost always start talks with a monologue about victimization and the West's colonial history in Iran. This narrative seeks to blame all the ills of Iran and the Middle East on American imperialism and Western colonialism. Iranian negotiators use this victimization narrative to deflect and even justify the Islamic Republic's nefarious activities today, from its pursuit for nuclear weapons, to its ballistic missile program, to its support for terrorist proxies. This victimization narrative seeks to tap into the far right and far left sentiments across the West, which view all the ills of the Middle East as a result of so-called neocon policies and ultimately overlook the destabilizing role of Iran's regime across the Middle East. This is a prime strategy used by the Islamic Republic against the West. Tehran views the West as a homogenous bloc, and therefore in its negotiations to weaken this bloc, it has sought to divide and conquer. The roots of this strategy emanate from Ayatollah Khamenei's so-called West without the US. Tehran's negotiators today, not least Abbas Araghchi, the chief negotiator and foreign minister, is trying to drive a wedge between the United States, between Trump and the E3.
One of the strategies that the Islamic Republic likes to employ in its negotiations with the United States and its allies is to engage in influence and information operations. And this has historically been the case. Part of this effort is to ensure that Tehran dominates the media narrative, to create the impression that it is driving the agenda. This enables influence and psychological operations as Iranian press outlets drip feed confidential disclosures about the content of the negotiations at a time when the United States is more muted as to the content of those negotiations. And it's designed, these Iranian disclosures are designed to provoke and inflame perceived U.S. fissures over Iran policy. There's also been a concerted effort by the Iranian regime and its sympathizers in the West to promote and defend some U.S. officials while attacking other U.S. officials. And this forms the basis of what is known as a psychological operation. As the U.S. Air Force has written, PSYOP efforts are aimed to disrupt, confuse, and protract an adversary's decision-making process, undermining command and control. And the Iranians are attempting to do that when they try to pit one U.S. official against another, expressing a preference for some U.S. officials while denigrating others. And we've seen this consistently throughout this negotiating process. Already, Iranian officials and their amplifiers and the rest are also attacking former Obama and Biden administration officials, despite formally working with them on the JCPOA. Iran and its sympathizers are leveling accusations that the Democrats were not as strong as the Trump administration and are sabotaging diplomacy. This is all aimed at masking Tehran's well-documented contempt for President Trump after it tried to assassinate him, and is all linked to inflaming the U.S. partisan divide in the hope it leads Republicans to support and rally around President Trump in the hopes of a JCPOA 2.0 deal, despite President Trump rightfully repudiating that. But the Iranians want to promote that fissure and to capitalize on any kind of polarization in the U.S. polity. And so they are trying to pit Republicans against Democrats. And I think that all Americans, Republican, Democrat, Independent, need to be on guard against these tactics and avoid getting swept up in the Iranian regime's efforts to manipulate U.S. public opinion.
Another method used by the Iranians is the Bazari mentality. The Bazari mentality is part and parcel of the Iranian DNA. It refers to haggling in every aspect of daily life. The Iranians apply this in the negotiating strategy by making overly ambitious demands to allow room for compromise and slowly and reluctantly making concessions. And while Western negotiators may believe that they apply the negotiations in the same manner, the Iranians have mastered the art of the Bazari mentality. Why? Because it's a feature of everyday life in Iran, from buying groceries to ordering a taxi. This marks a stark contrast to the West, where there are set rules, regulations, and life in general is much more bureaucratic.